My name is Fiona Crane, and my family found out what I actually did for a living on the night the basement flooded under my father's 60th birthday party. We were in the grand ballroom of the Ambassador Club, an old landmark building downtown, the kind with a marble lobby built to make you feel small in a way that is supposed to feel like respect. My father, Conrad Crane, had chosen it because it is the most impressive room in the city, and my family has always believed that the most impressive room is the same thing as the most important one. I was at the far end of the table in a plain dress, and my brother Grant had already called me the janitor twice, loud enough for the next table, and my sister Vivian had already asked, with her particular gentleness, whether I could actually afford to be there. I let it go. I had been letting it go for 5 years. Then, somewhere below our feet, a 60-year-old pipe let go instead. That is where I want to start, because the room my family thought mattered was upstairs in the light, and the thing that actually decided how that night went was down in the dark, where none of them would ever have looked. So let me tell you how the daughter they called a failure ended up being the only person in that building everyone turned to when the floor beneath the party started to give. Back up 5 years. I grew up inside Crane Capital, the family investment firm, the way some kids grow up inside a church. My father built it, my grandfather before him, and the plan for me was written before I could read. Fast track, partner track, a corner office with my name on the glass. And I walked away from it. I did not walk away in anger. I walked away because I had spent one summer, as a bored 22-year-old, shadowing the crew that maintained the very tower Crane Capital leased its floors in, and I had fallen in love with something my family could not even see. I fell in love with the basement. There was an old building engineer down there named Vernon, gray and unhurried, who ran the guts of that tower like a ship's engine room, and Vernon taught me the thing that became the whole shape of my life. He caught me one day staring up at the lobby, all that marble and brass, and he said, "You like the lobby. Everybody likes the lobby." Then he pointed a wrench at the floor. "But anybody can read a lobby," he said. "A lobby is just the face a building puts on for strangers. You want to know if a building is any good, if it will hold, if it will still be standing in 50 years, you do not go up. You go down. You go to the basement where nobody looks, and you look at what is actually holding the whole thing up. Go to the basement. I have run my entire life on those 3 words, and I never once explained them to my family, because you cannot explain a basement to people who only trust lobbies. So I did the thing that broke my father's heart, or his image of me, which he has always had trouble telling apart. I turned down the corner office. I took the $2 million from the trust my father had set up for me, and instead of a down payment on the life they had drawn, I used it to start a company, not a fund. A building services company, Sentinel. The unglamorous business of actually operating buildings, the engineers and the cleaners and the security staff, and the night crews who keep the water running and the heat on and the elevators safe. The invisible people who keep every impressive lobby in this city from becoming a ruin. I started it by working the crews myself, on the mop and on the boilers and on the graveyard shift, because Vernon was right, and you cannot run a basement you have never stood in. My family decided I had become a janitor. They were not entirely wrong about the mop. They were only wrong about what it meant. For 5 years, I let them keep the small story, and here is where I have to be honest, because this is not only about what they got wrong. When people at parties asked what I did, my mother, Lorraine, would say Fiona is in maintenance and let the sentence sink like a stone, and I let her. When Grant, who slid into the spot at Crane Capital that had been drawn for me, called me the janitor, I corrected him once, tiredly, and then I stopped, because it was easier to be underestimated than to be understood. If they thought I was beneath them, they never looked closely, and if they never looked closely, they could never get their hands on the thing I loved and try to turn it into something that would look better in a lobby. I kept them out to keep it safe. That is on me. The pity was theirs. The distance I built. What I built besides the distance was a real company. Not a secret empire, not billions hidden behind shell companies, And I want to say that plainly because I know the version of this story where the quiet one turns out to have been a hidden tycoon all along. That was not me. I was not rich the way my father measures rich. What I had was 240 employees who had health insurance and a share of the company for the first time in their working lives, a crew of people the rest of the city would not look in the eye, and a client list that had quietly grown until Sentinel operated most of the landmark buildings in the district, including, though my family never thought to ask, the Ambassador Club. I had been keeping my father's favorite impressive room running for 3 years before he chose it for his birthday. He just never went to the basement. Which brings us back to the pipe. It went at 9 in the evening, right about the time Grant was telling the table that real success is about vision, not mopping floors. I felt it before anyone else did, because I have spent 5 years learning to feel a building the way Vernon feels one. A change in the sound of the place. A wrongness in the air. Then a young server hurried to the club's general manager, and I watched her face, and I knew. A main had let go in the sub-basement, and water was rising toward the electrical room. And if it reached the switchgear, the whole landmark would go dark and cold in the middle of a full house. And worse than dark, it would be dangerous. Here is the part my family will be telling for the rest of their lives. The general manager of the Ambassador Club, in the worst 90 seconds of her month, did not run to my father, the important man whose name was on the birthday cake. She crossed the entire ballroom, past all that marble and all those impressive people, and she came to the end of the table where the janitor was sitting, and she said, "Ms. Crane, we have a problem in the sub-basement. We need you." The table went silent. Grant actually laughed, one confused bark because it made no sense to him. And I stood up and I said, "Show me," and I followed her out of the lobby and down. I did not make a speech. I want that on the record, because there is a version of me that had waited 5 years to make a speech, and I found, going down those stairs, that I did not want one. Vernon did not teach me the basement, so I could use it to win an argument upstairs. I went down into the dark with my crew, the night crew, in their Sentinel uniforms with the little logo on the back. And we found the break, and we killed the right valve and threw the right isolation, and moved the water away from the switchgear. And I stood in 6 inches of cold water in the dress I had bought for my father's birthday, and did the work I actually do. It took about 40 minutes. Nobody upstairs lost a single light. When I came back up, my whole family was standing at the top of the stairs. They had followed. And they had seen the logo on the backs of the crew, and they had seen the manager defer to me. And somewhere in those 40 minutes, my father had asked her a question and gotten an answer. And the answer was that his daughter, the one he had spent 5 years explaining apologetically at parties, was the founder of the company that keeps this landmark and a dozen like it alive, that the invisible people of half the district's great buildings work for her, that when this club is in trouble it does not call an important man, it calls Fiona. Grant recovered first, because Grant always recovers first. He is my father's son. Within a minute he was already building the new story, the useful one. "Fiona," he said, "this is incredible. This is exactly what Crane Capital has been missing, an operations arm. We should talk about bringing Sentinel under the firm, combining resources." And I could see the whole merger assembling itself behind his eyes, before the water on my dress had even dripped to the floor. "No," I said. He blinked. I said, "No, Grant. I am not folding what I built into the firm. I am not an asset you get to acquire now that you have finally noticed I exist. And I am not going to do the other thing you are all about to expect either, which is punish you. I know how this is supposed to go. I own the building your firm leases. I could stop renewing your lease. I could put your movers on the street. I could make a very satisfying scene. I am not going to. Not because you have earned mercy, but because Vernon did not build a basement so I could flood one. Tearing you down would not make my company 1 inch stronger. It would just make me someone who confuses the lobby with the win, and I have spent 5 years learning better than that." Then my mother said the thing that these stories usually end on, and that I refuse to let stand. She reached for my wet hand and she said, "We always knew you were special. We always believed in you. and I stopped her gently all the way. No, Mom, you did not know. You did not know because I never let you in, and that is mine to carry. But you also never once asked. For 5 years, you had a daughter who keeps this city standing from the basement up, and you told your friends she was in maintenance and let it sink like a stone. I am not going to help you rewrite that into a story where you were proud the whole time, because it is not true, and I build things that are true or I do not build them at all. Nobody rushed to fill the quiet, for once. And then my father did something I did not expect, and it is the reason this is not a story about revenge. Conrad Crane, in his tailored suit at the top of the basement stairs, on his 60th birthday, looked down at the water on my dress and then at the crew still coiling hoses below us, and he did not try to make a deal. He said, very quietly, so only I could hear it, "Teach me." "Teach you what?" I said. "Not the business," he said. "Not the money. Teach me how to see what you see. I have looked at buildings my whole life and I have never once looked at the basement." He was not performing it. My father has performed humility in negotiations for 40 years, and I know exactly what it looks like, and this was not that. This was an old man realizing he had been reading lobbies his entire life and had missed the thing holding everything up, including his own daughter. So I tested it because words are cheap and my father has always been rich in cheap words. I said, "All right. Tomorrow morning, 5 o'clock, meet me at the loading dock, not the lobby, the dock. Wear shoes you do not care about. If you want to understand me, you start where I started. You start in the basement. I did not think he would come. He came. 5 o'clock in the dark in old shoes, and I put him in a spare uniform and walked him through the building the way Vernon once walked me, down to where the boilers breathe and the pumps run and the night crew was finishing their shift, and I introduced him to Hank and to Della, who have worked for me since the first year, and my father, who has shaken hands with senators, shook their hands like they were the important people in the room, because that morning, for the first time, he understood that they were. He did not say much. For Conrad, not saying much is a kind of prayer. At the end, he looked up the elevator shaft toward the lobby he had admired his whole life, and he said, "I never once looked down here. All these years. I just looked at the lobby." And I said, "I know, Dad. Most people do." I want to be careful about the ending, because the audience for stories like mine always wants the whole family healed by breakfast, and that is not what happened, and I would not respect it if it were. My brother Grant did not transform. He is still angry, in the quiet way of a man who was handed a lobby and never learned there was a basement, and I keep him at the length he keeps himself. My sister Vivian sent one careful text that was more about her than about me. The door to them is open, the real one, but it opens onto ordinary Tuesdays with no emergency to witness, and I will know they have changed by whether any of them ever walks through it when there is nothing to see. But my father comes now, not to merge, not to deal. He comes at 5 in the morning, once a month, in the old shoes, and he walks the basement with the crew, and he is learning their names, and he is learning to feel a building the way you can only feel one from underneath. It is not a grand reconciliation. It is an old man showing up in the dark with nothing to gain. In my experience, that is the only kind of change that holds. And I let my niece Posey, who is 9 and whom this family has already started to overlook because she likes taking things apart more than she likes being looked at, come along on those mornings so that she learns early what took me 22 years to find out. I told Posey the thing Vernon told me, standing by the boilers with my father listening. "Someday," I said, "the whole world is going to teach you to love the lobby. The titles, the marble, the impressive room. Do not fall for it. Anybody can read a lobby. If you want to know whether something will hold, a building, a company, a person, a family, you do not look at the face it shows strangers. You go down to the basement, where nobody looks, and you look at what is actually holding the whole thing up." My family spent 5 years admiring the lobby and calling me the failure who cleaned it. They never once went to the basement. If they had, they would have found me there the whole time, in the dark, in the water, holding the building up. So if there is someone in your life you have written off as the one who did not make it, the quiet one, the one with the unglamorous job you do not quite understand, Do one thing before you carve that story any deeper. Stop admiring the lobby. Go down. Go to the basement. You may find that the person you have been pitying is the reason your lights have never once gone out.